how can you cleave to God when it is written, your God is a devouring fire? Okay, that's the question the Talmud poses. How can you cleave to God if God is Esh Ochla, a devouring fire? Rather, the meaning is, whoever marries his daughter to a disciple of the wise, meaning to a scholar, if you marry your daughter to a Torah scholar, or if you conduct business on the behalf of scholars, if you benefit scholars from your assets, then you are regarded by Scripture as if you cleave to Shekhinah. Very interesting. So he's really saying it's impossible to cleave to fire. You can't cleave to God. You would be burned up instantly. But if you support scholars, then it's as if you joined Shekhinah. Okay, notice a parallel in Babylonian Talmud Sotah, another part of the Talmud. Here I'm paraphrasing. Rabbi Chama, son of Hanina, explains that one can approach and withstand the consuming fire of Shekhinah by imitating the divine. If you imitate God, then it's as if you cling to Shekhinah. How do you imitate God? By clothing the naked, visiting the sick, comforting mourners, burying the dead. In other words, if you act virtuously, if you act ethically, if you act with some care and compassion and love for other people, then it's as if you are clinging to Shekhinah. There's one beautiful mystical response to this, the end of this note. A mystical response to this dilemma is offered by Jikatila. He's a Kabbalist who lived in Spain around the time of the Zohar. He says, as for what the rabbis have said, now is it possible for one to cleave to Shekhinah? It certainly is. He takes that question, which is a rhetorical question, right? In the Talmud, it's, can you really cleave to Shekhinah? Obviously you can't. But Jikatila says, no, you can. Being a mystic, being a Kabbalist, he thinks it is possible to cleave, to join the divine. So all of that is in the Talmud, and that's how Rabbi Shimon says we have established these verses. Okay, we've already talked about it, but he says, come and see. He's now going to offer a new approach to this image of God being a fire. Come and see. For Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God is a devouring fire. The word has been discussed among the companions. There is a fire, devouring and consuming it. For there is fire fiercer than fire, as they have established. Okay, there are different types of fire. Don't think that there's just one fire. Look down at the note and you'll see what he's referring to here in the Talmud, note 1342. This is page 282, the right-hand column. See, again, BT, Babylonian Talmud. Here it's the tractate Yoma, the tractate devoted to Yom Kippur. And in that Talmudic passage, we read that the fire of Moses attained that rung. Okay, most people, or could say the Jewish people, is identified with Shekhinah. They can reach that level of Malchut through great devotion. But Moses attained a higher level. He reached the level of Tiferet, the white light. So he doesn't say, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, our God is a consuming fire, a devouring fire. He says, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God is a devouring fire, because he abides in the realm of Tiferet, and that white light, Tiferet, Moses' rung, Moses' Sfirah, does not consume or devour. Let's pause here. There's a little bit more I want to explore in the Zohar passage, but let's pause here and see if any questions have come up. And Ari, please, you could, if there's something in the chat or if someone has a hand raised, we could pause for a minute and explore this.
You'll be very quiet today in the chat. I guess I'll give people a moment by asking two quick questions. One is, you talk about this underlying concept or important concept in the Zohar, in the Kabbalah, about being the unification of male and female. Is that explicitly stated that way, or is it just all implicit and therefore it becomes explicit once you have read the whole Zohar.
Yeah, the passage we have here, there's hardly anything there that would suggest there's actual union, actual romance. You do that phrase embracing one another. But other places in the Zohar, it's much more overt, really full, even graphic descriptions of the union of the male and female. The Zohar is sometimes subtle and very often enigmatic and cryptic, but it's clear that there's a divine romance. Now remember, this is all really just glimpses of the divine. Ultimately, the Zohar would insist that God is beyond description, right? God cannot be captured in our words or images. So Ein Sof, the infinite, there it's just a realm of pure oneness. There you don't have different qualities, different aspects. But once you reach this realm of the 10 Sefirot, there you really do have God described in very personal, very anthropomorphic ways, right? Maimonides, who tried to eliminate anthropomorphism, right? This human descriptions of God, Maimonides tried to eliminate those as much as he could. But the Zohar reacts against Maimonides and says, ultimately, God cannot be described. Ultimately, God is Ein Sof. But most of the Zohar is about the Sefirot and not about Ein Sof. And so you do have really full descriptions of that divine romance.
In your notes, where you quote from the beginning of the section, we quote from the Talmud where they're explaining these verses, the Yud Hey Vav Hey. In the notes, they just jump to Shekhinah already. In the Talmud, do they just automatically say that Yud Hey Vav Hey from those two verses is the Shekhinah, or is that you using Shekhinah in that context in your notes so we can put two and two together?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. For the Zohar, Yud Hey Vav Hey would rarely signify Shekhinah. Yud Hey Vav Hey could signify Tiferet or all of the 10 Sefirot. It would be unusual for Yud Hey Vav Hey specifically to denote Shekhinah. So what we're seeing there in the Talmud is really, it really shows us the development of Shekhinah. Okay, in Rabbinic Judaism, you never have a description. You're going back to your first question, the union of the male and female within God. In the Talmud, you would never find that. You never find in the Talmud a description of the male and female parts of God uniting. There are one or two hints to a female divine quality. What I mean is Shekhinah, okay, which we see now as feminine because of the Kabbalah. Shekhinah in the Talmud and Midrash does not mean the feminine half of God. Shekhinah simply means God. Shekhinah means specifically how God manifests in the world. So God's presence in the world is what is meant by Shekhinah. In the Zohar, Shekhinah comes to mean the feminine half of God. But go back to your question, the Talmud does identify Yud Hey Vav Hey as Shekhinah, because for the Talmud, Shekhinah simply means God. So any divine name could refer to Shekhinah. Whereas in the Zohar, because Shekhinah is specifically feminine, it would not usually be identified with Shekhinah. I hope that's more of an explanation than more confusion. But that's what I would say.
I think there are some comments that I think what people are referring to in their comments is Shabbat as this ultimate mystical union. Kabbalat Shabbat, lighting the candles, welcoming the bride, and all the mystical stuff that people explain about union and what's going on there, and how this ties into some of what you've been teaching us.
Very much so. That's very relevant. Kabbalat Shabbat. It's interesting. It's called Kabbalat Shabbat, which means what? The Kabbalah of Shabbat. But it doesn't mean the Jewish mysticism of Shabbat. Kabbalah means welcoming. Lekabel is to receive or to welcome. So Kabbalat Shabbat means welcoming the Shabbat. Now it's interesting. Kabbalat Shabbat does have something to do with Kabbalah, because Kabbalat Shabbat was invented by the Kabbalah. You do not have the full liturgy, the full prayers of Kabbalat Shabbat until we come to the Kabbalah. The Talmud does not say to begin the Shabbat with L'chadodi, welcoming the bride. The Talmud does refer to Shabbat as a queen, as a bride, but you don't have the full ritual of Kabbalat Shabbat until we come to the Kabbalah. So what is Shabbat for the Kabbalah? Shabbat is the wedding day of God. Friday evening, we're celebrating Shekhinah. And as you say, Shekhinah is identified as the Shabbat queen, the Shabbat bride. And the union of Shekhinah with the Holy One, blessed be He, is actually hinted at. It's actually referred to in L'Chadodi. Now, what is L'Chadodi? I'm sure most of you know L'Chadodi, one of the most beautiful prayers in the prayer book. That was written by a Kabbalist in Tzfat, in the city of Tzfat in the 16th century. And that is a celebration of Shekhinah, and it refers to Shekhinah and her husband. Now, who is the husband of Shekhinah? The husband of Shekhinah is Tiferet, her masculine partner, her spouse. So Kabbalat Shabbat is a wonderful example of how Kabbalah affected Judaism. You know, many people say, well, Kabbalah is interesting, but is it really mainstream Judaism? Okay, what could be more mainstream than L'Chadodi? What could be more mainstream than the image of the Sabbath bride, the Sabbath queen? And that really is, to a great extent, the contribution, the gift of the Zohar and the Kabbalah.
One last comment. One of our regulars and donors noted how Shekhinah and the description of Shekhinah in the flame really puts the female once again in a place of deprivation of agency. That Shekhinah is dependent on two different elements, as opposed to Tiferet, which is above it all, more powerful, I would say. And anyway, it was just an interesting note of what you taught us.
Yeah, that's very important. Very important just to honestly say that the Zohar, the Kabbalah, is a product of the medieval mind. In some ways, it's very much, of the past. With all of the advance that is made, okay, it is a great step forward to recover the feminine within God, right? God is so overwhelmingly masculine, as we've said before, right? In all of Western religion, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, God is overwhelmingly masculine. It's hard to find descriptions of God as feminine. So it's a great breakthrough. It's a great step forward that the Zohar and the Kabbalah celebrate the feminine nature of the divine. But it is true that this is a hierarchical system very often in many ways, and Shekhinah is beneath Tiferet. Shekhinah is seen as the throne of Tiferet. And here the white light is constant, Tiferet, where Shekhinah could be blue or black or red. The thing of her being dependent on what's beneath, though, is very interesting, because for the Zohar, God is dependent on the human being. I would say the masculine and the feminine of God are in some ways incomplete without human participation, without human action. If we don't act in the world, then God is left not unified. God is separate. The male without the female without the male. So both aspects of Shekhinah, the male and the female, are dependent on human action. The Kabbalistic phrase for this is Sorech Gavoa, literally the need on high. God needs us. God needs the human being. Many of you are familiar with the thought of Abraham Joshua Heschel, great teacher of the 20th century. And his most famous book is called God in Search of Man. Okay, it should be God in search of the human, we might say. But God is searching for us. It's not just we're searching for God. God needs us. So that radical idea you have hinted at in the Talmud and the Midrash, but the Zohar really develops it further. So I would just say, in summary, the female is still subservient to the male, according to many descriptions. But on the other hand, both male and female are in need of the human being. I would say, too, sometimes Shekhinah is called king, not just queen. Sometimes Shekhinah can be king because she rules over the world. Even though Tiferet is higher than Shekhinah in some sense, Shekhinah is in charge of the world. Shekhinah is ruling over the world. Okay, let's return to the text, and then by the time we're done, we'll have some more questions. So Moses says, you're a God, not our God, because Moses is connected with Tiferet. Come and see. Okay, we're on page 284 of volume 1 of the Zohar Pritzker edition. Come and see. The only arousal kindling this blue light to be grasped by the white light is Israel cleaving below. Okay, finally, there's a reference to the Jewish people, to Israel. So the blue light we're saying is Tiferet. The blue light we're saying is Shekhinah. The only way to kindle Shekhinah, for her to be grasped by Tiferet, okay, to stimulate the divine union, how does that arousal happen? The only way is by Israel cleaving below. Israel has to yearn for God. Israel has to strive to connect with God in order for Shekhinah to unite with Tiferet. See what the note has here, very simply, 1350. Their devotion, Israel's devotion, fuels the passion of the divine couple. Okay, without holiness on the part of human beings, on the part of Israel, God remains incomplete. God remains ununified. Come and see. Although by nature this blue-black light consumes anything cleaving below, right? Shekhinah is a fire. Anything placed beneath that fire will be consumed. Even though that's so, Israel cleaves below and abides enduringly. Even though Israel cleaves to Shekhinah, they're not consumed. As is written, you cleaving to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, are alive. Even though you're cleaving to God, okay, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh here means Shekhinah, even though you're cleaving to Shekhinah, you're alive. To Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, not our God, right? Moses is on a different level, but we are connected. We are close to Shekhinah. Shekhinah is accessible to us. To Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, to that blue-black light devouring, consuming whatever cleaves below. Yet you cleave and endure. As is written, alive, every one of you today. Even though the fire consumes, somehow Israel is able to experience devekut, right? The Hebrew word here is devekut, cleaving. That's the word in the verse from Deuteronomy, va'atem hadevekim, you who cleave to God. So Israel can cleave to God and yet remain alive. That's the wonder. That's how we can reconcile these two verses. We should cleave to God. Even though Shekhinah is a fire, we're able to withstand that. Above the white light hovers a concealed light, encompassing it. This is the allusion to Bina. Okay, so Malchut Shekhinah is the blue light, Tiferet is the white light. Higher than Tiferet is Bina, doesn't even name a color here, but Bina is a more concealed, hidden realm, okay, the divine mother.
Maybe the P word is just my cross to carry. For over 17 years, I really believed that this was a life sentence and something that I would just fight and struggle with forever. Until I discovered a really simple process that's helped over 3,000 other men in 33 countries permanently quit. For the next 17 years of my life, what I did in the incognito tab made me feel like a hypocrite and a fraud as a husband, as a father, as a business owner, and a leader inside of our church. I felt trapped in this cycle of resisting temptation and then failing, resisting and failing over and over again. And the only thing that helped me break out of that cycle was a truth that I'm actually going to show you in scripture that helped me realize that the P word wasn't even my real problem. See, this controlling urge that I fought almost daily for over 17 years was actually just a surface level symptom of a much deeper root issue. And the same may be true for you. It's probably no coincidence that God placed this in front of you today, and I want to let you know that the only thing that I thank God for more than leading me to freedom is that He somehow...
Above the white light hovers a concealed light encompassing it. Here abides supernal mystery. You will discover all in the ascending flame, wisdoms of the highest. If you meditate on a candle, if you penetrate the outer surface meaning of those colors, you can imagine divine qualities. You can discover everything by gazing at a candle. Look down at the note 1352. I bring something here from a famous scientist. 1352. You'll discover all in the ascending flame. See the remark of the 19th century physicist Michael Faraday at the beginning of his Chemical History of a Candle. Okay, this is a little booklet that Michael Faraday wrote, Chemical History of a Candle. Look what he says. There is not a law under which any part of this universe is governed, which does not come into play and is touched upon in these phenomena. Okay, that may sound hard to understand, but now it becomes clear. There is no more open door by which you can enter into the study of natural philosophy than by considering the physical phenomena of a candle. Okay, what Faraday does in these talks, Chemical History of a Candle, is really talks he gave for children or for adolescents in the 19th century. He said you can find out everything you need to know about natural philosophy, really means science. You can find out everything you need to know about chemistry by looking at a candle and seeing how it consumes and how it feeds on physical substance. So Faraday goes through that in a very different way than we've seen the Zohar do. But look what they share. Both of them say you can understand everything by looking at a candle. All of science or all of mysticism, you can understand the deepest secrets of nature, of being, of reality, if you meditate on a candle. It's beautiful there to see science and religion harmonizing in a certain way. So Rabbi Shimon has taught all of this. We're just going to read the next two lines in conclusion. Rabbi Pinchas approached and kissed him. Rabbi Pinchas kissed Rabbi Shimon, saying, "Blessed be the compassionate one that we happened to meet here. I'm so glad I ran into you, because look at the Torah that I have learned." Okay, let's stop the share and let's discuss this a little more. And I'd encourage people to ask questions either about this specifically, let's give that a few minutes, but then just more generally, Kabbalah, mysticism, Torah, anything that comes to mind, either in the chat or if you're adventurous, you could raise your hand and we may be able to call on you.
So Howard has something to say. Howard says, in talking about Israel and cleaving to the light that consumes everything. So that's a very dangerous place to be, isn't it? I'm kind of paraphrasing. And the way we can protect ourselves, according to Howard, would be, well, we do the mitzvot and we adhere to the principles of faith, and that protects us and allows us to come close to this flame. But that does not imply great risk. In other words, can't this lead to self-destruction because we're so close to this powerful force? If we don't follow the mitzvot and don't do things right, this dvekut will lead to destruction.
Yeah. What about the danger of dvekut? I mean, the Zohar begins like the Talmud by almost saying, how can you possibly cleave to Shekhinah? And then it says, no, Israel is somehow able to. So you're right. There's something dangerous about this this contact with the divine. In general, it would not be seen as something possible or not possible frequently, not possible for normal people, right? Only the great pious saint might be able to cultivate an intimacy with Shekhinah. How could simple everyday people even imagine that they could come out unscathed? So that's certainly here in the background. There's something dangerous about the contact with fire. God is fire. You're right that mitzvot are the key here. I would say mitzvot are protection, but mitzvot are also the way that you approach it all. Okay, by performing a mitzvah, you're putting yourself in relationship with the divine. You're letting God guide you. You're letting God inspire you, and that could lead to very beautiful ethical perfection. It could motivate you to become just and loving and compassionate, but it could also be dangerous. So what's the danger here about mysticism? What's the danger involved with contact with the divine? We've all heard, I think probably all heard, you shouldn't study Kabbalah until you've reached a certain age or until you've mastered certain fields. What were the Kabbalists scared about? What were the rabbis scared about? What's dangerous about trying to become intimate with God? I think we've talked about this before, but it's very important, so it's certainly worth exploring a little bit again. I think really there's a social danger and a psychological danger. The psychological danger is that you're looking so deeply into yourself. This is somewhat similar to psychoanalysis, But if you look so deeply into yourself, what are you going to uncover? We're told we should explore our fears, we should explore our desires, but what happens if you uncover some deep, dark secret, some terror that you experience? Is that going to be helpful or is it going to be destructive? So with the proper guidance, with the proper preparation, certainly that would be healing. Ideally, it would be healing to work through one's own dark places. But we could easily see how that's dangerous. It's dangerous to uncover too much. And the mystic is really doing something similar. The mystical search is not so much jumping up to heaven. It's really going deep within your soul, deep within your heart. So there's something powerful about that journey. There's something vital about that journey, but there is a danger there. So there's a fine line, I think, between mysticism and madness. Right? It was often said, don't study the Kabbalah because you'll go crazy. That's what you hear on the popular version of, don't study Kabbalah because, and one of the conclusions of that sentence is because you could go mad. If you look so deeply into yourself, if you uncover all your secrets, will you be able to bear that? So there's a psychological danger in spiritual search. There's also a social danger, and here it's really a matter of who has the authority? Who has the authority in the Jewish world to tell you how to act? Should you follow the tradition? Should you follow the halakha? Should you follow the rabbi? Or should you follow your own inner spiritual yearning? So that is seen as dangerous too. If you have your own connection to God, if you can cultivate your own relationship with God, then you might question the Torah. You might question the rabbi. You might say, I don't need another guide. I can guide myself. And we all know the danger of that. People who say, God told me to do this, right? We know murderers and horrible, evil people who have claimed that they're fulfilling the will of God. So the danger, the social danger and the psychological danger of intimacy with the divine is obvious. And the Kabbalah is aware of that. And here the Kabbalah is wrestling with that. The Talmud said, don't even try. Don't try to connect directly with God. How can you proceed? Imitate God. God is kind. You should be kind. That's really that's the message here. So the danger is real, but I think what the Zohar has to offer, what the Kabbalah has to offer, is so valuable that I think it's worth proceeding, but to proceed with caution. So how do you delve into mysticism and protect yourself? Here it's also a matter of Torah and mitzvot, having some structure, having some code, having some guardrails, having a banister. You're climbing the stairway to heaven. You have to have a banister. So what is the banister? The banister is friends. The banister is a teacher. The banister is keeping yourself grounded. The banister is being in relationship. The banister is feeling responsibility for your spouse, for your children, to think of the other. The great Jewish philosopher Levinas says that's really the key to all of Judaism, is the idea of the other. Don't focus just on my own thrill, my own excitement, my own passion, not even my own holiness. Don't just focus on your own holiness. Focus on your relationship with the other.
We have some hands up before we get there. Stefan asks, is unification in Kabbalah actually to be achieved one day? Is that the Messianic age, or is it never to be achieved?
The unification, I think, is something that comes and goes. I think there are moments of wholeness, there are moments of perfection, there are moments of attainment, and then you could say Messiah is seen as, Yom Shekulo Shabbat, the total Sabbath. Right now we have Shabbat one day a week. When Mashiach comes, it will be full-time Shabbat, 24/7. So full unification you might see as something messianic, but getting a taste of the oneness is something we can do now through meditation, through prayer, through acting in holy ways. You get a taste of that oneness, both on a personal level and imagining God's becoming whole, God's becoming one, which, as we said, is dependent on how we act.
So we have Shira and Harvey had a question, so we'll ask to unmute and see what question they have. Great.
Yes, Shabbat Shalom. There's a question of cleaving, and from what aspect in myself does that cleaving issue? Is it an active cleaving, reaching out to grasp hold of, or is it a passive cleaving, opening myself with an inner attention to holiness? How is that cleaving best activated?
Yeah, it's a great question. That word davak, it's just the Hebrew davak, it sounds very active and forceful and powerful. And the English to cling or to cleave sounds like something that you need to do actively, not just to sit there and wait for it to happen. But what you say about being receptive, being open is vital here. I think there's an active and a passive quality to this experience of devekut. It sounds active, but you really have to let go for it to happen. You have to open yourself. You have to be receptive. You have to open your heart. So I think there's a preparation of openness, of letting go, and then something comes to you, or you are empowered. You're empowered and able to act in a mindful way. Really, when we're talking about mysticism and spirituality, I think awareness is perhaps the most important element. So there's an active stance, an active role that you can fulfill or strive to fulfill. And there's an openness and awareness that will allow for the connection.
Great question. Cheryl has a question. So Cheryl, I'm muting you.
Hey, Danny. Am I on? Yeah, I guess I'm muted. In the Zohar, it seems that most of it has a lot to do with both the feminine and the masculine side and joining. But then you leave the Zohar and you get into rabbinical Judaism, Messianic Judaism, and there isn't very much about the feminine side to things, or the role of women in Judaism so much. It's very much a patriarchal, masculine push through of everything. How is that one of the reasons that maybe the Zohar is not terribly popular in mainstream Judaism?
It's such an interesting phrase, mainstream Judaism, and I mentioned it before myself. We're talking about Shabbat and Kabbalat Shabbat, right? It's interesting. Arthur Green, I'm sure many of you know of his name and his work. He looked into this, and it's interesting. The first time you ever have that phrase, mainstream Judaism, it's in a German book in the 19th century, and that book is an attack on what? On Kabbalah. In other words, mainstream Judaism is trying to exclude what might be uncomfortable, might be challenging to the normal presentation of Judaism. So I think there is a tension between what the Kabbalah suggests and the picture you would find if you open a typical page of the Bible, a typical page of the Talmud. As we've said, you don't find God described in feminine ways in many Jewish texts, and that's one of the most radical differences between the Zohar and the Talmud or the Bible. So I would say that is one of the great contributions of the Kabbalah, to insist that God is equally male and female. Ultimately, God is beyond all gender. Okay, in self is not male or female. The infinite is beyond gender. But if we're going to talk about God, God has been talked about for so long in purely masculine terms. I think it's important to balance the masculine with the feminine. And that's the great contribution of the Zohar. I would say that in the last, 30 years, that critique of Judaism has become very widespread. and I'm sure you're aware, maybe more aware than I am, of Jewish feminism and Jewish feminists, and how Judaism has changed over the past few decades. And I think one of the most important changes is to criticize the purely masculine description of God. So I think the Zohar is valuable in that sense, to look at a holy text of Judaism, to look at one of the holiest texts of Judaism does celebrate the feminine within God. I'm not saying that people have to follow the Zohar. Much of the Zohar is very difficult and challenging, but the great gift of the Zohar is that here is someone 700 years ago, right? The Zohar was composed in Spain, was largely composed in Spain in the 13th century. So here's a book written 700 years ago that gives equal weight to the feminine. I would say that there's more about Shekhinah in the Zohar than you would find it in any other Jewish text. And that's something, that revolution is still going on. People might say we've made a lot of progress. People would say we've made hardly any progress, but things are changing. Things have changed. And that, to my mind, is one of the great gifts of the mystical tradition.
So last few things before we call the session. Rob wants to know about he wants to know, what's the point about above the white light hovers a concealed light encompassing it? It seems like almost an unnecessary addition to the discussion we had. We focused on the two lights. They were the main lights, and all of a sudden you have this reference. It doesn't really go anywhere. So,
yes. It's very interesting. I'm really glad you raised that. It's really typical of the Zohar. Zohar proceeds, it begins with this very difficult imagery, and remember, it doesn't name Shekhinah, it doesn't name Tiferet. Finally, after we've worked through a couple pages of that, okay, now I finally get it. The blue light is Shekhinah, right, with my notes and my explanation. Now I understand the blue light is Shekhinah, the white light is Tiferet. We finally got it. And this is typical of the Zohar. You think you got it? Well, there's another level. I'm not going to go into it. I'm not going to say much about it, but you should know there's something more. So I think it's kind of saying, don't think that you have the whole package. There's something further to explore. There's something yet to be discovered, and it leaves you hanging. You could like that or dislike that, but it's a very characteristic of the Zohar not to end a passage where it's finally all clear and figured out. There's still something mysterious. In fact, I think it's even, let me just pull it up one more second. It's even worded that way, right? Above the white light hovers a concealed light encompassing it. Here abides supernal mystery. Okay, so there's still mystery. Even though it's now been explained, there's still mystery. You will discover all. Go back to the candle. Go back, light the candle, start again, see where it leads you. But leaving open that, giving us that sense of we're only beginning the journey. We haven't completed the journey.
And then are there any other meditation-like techniques that are in Zohar that we can look forward to learning about?
There are, a good number of meditative techniques. The fullest description of them is in a book by Aryeh Kaplan, Kaplan, Meditation and Kabbalah. He has a more popular book just called Jewish Meditation, but Meditation and Kabbalah draws on dozens or more techniques from Zohar and other books of Kabbalah. Many of them have to do with the letters of the divine name or different divine names. Ayin, focusing on no thingness. We've explored that theme of Aleph Yud Nun, of nothingness. Meditating on Ayin, trying to melt into the oneness or the no thingness. But there are not many in the Zohar itself. I suggest you look at Kaplan for that.
So thank you so much. We were talking before the program, your new book you're in final proofing of your new book about becoming Elijah, being published by Yale University Press in the spring. So we're looking forward to that coming out, maybe having you back for a series about Elijah. And on behalf of CSB, I want to thank you for taking us to places we ordinarily probably wouldn't go or shouldn't go by ourselves. I know some of you do, and I know that I'll mention that Professor Matt has an ongoing class. When you do your class, like how often do you meet? Like what is a...
It's once a week, basically. We're going to start again in October.
How long?
The course in English is Tuesday evening.
And how long does it last?
It's about an hour and a half. I teach for an hour and then discussion. We have six. We have 6 weekly meetings. Then we take a break for a couple weeks and do another series of 6. And it's ongoing in that way. People can begin at the beginning with the recording, or they can jump in with the current session. They can see the description that you'll send out, and people can contact me if they need to discuss it further.
Right. I will forward you all the follow-up to this class with a link to how to sign up if you're interested in studying more Kabbalah. And thank you again, Professor Matt. I want to thank Rabbi Spitz. I saw him on here as well. Rabbi Spitz is one of the main people that introduced CSP to Professor Matt. And I know you were scheduled to come to Orange County 17 months ago. Right. Because of COVID, you never made it down here. So instead, we started this series. So this is our 6th program. We did series 1, 3-part series, series 2, and I anticipate we'll do some more series coming up in the next few months. And thank you all. Good to see you. Be safe out there. Remember, tomorrow we have a special conversation with Micha Oppenheimer, the Rabbi of Nepal. And hope you'll join us to hear about him, his story, and what he's achieved.
Wonderful.
Take care. Be safe. Get ready for Rosh Hashanah. And you can meditate on the candle on Friday night. I think it's allowed.
This we began exploring previously. We looked at some of the highlights last week. This is the main symbol system of the Kabbalah, what's known as the 10 Sefirot, the 10 aspects of God's personality, you might say. As I mentioned before, beyond all of these specific qualities of God is the ultimate reality of God, and the Kabbalah calls that Ein Sof. Literally, there is no end, or the infinity. So God is infinite. We shouldn't think that these Sefirot really capture the totality of God. These offer us glimpses of God's qualities, of God's attributes. Last week, we were talking about dreams. We talked a little bit about Netzach and Hod, the source of prophecy, and Malchut, Shekhinah, the last of the 10 Sefirot. Today, the focus is really on the divine couple, the male and female aspects of the Sefirot, Tiferet, which is the central Sefirah, this middle Sefirah here. Tiferet, literally beauty, but I think better understood as harmony, harmonizing the right and left, harmonizing Chesed, divine love, on the right, and Gevurah, divine power, on the left. So Tiferet is the middle of those two polar opposites. Another of its names is Rachamim, compassion. It's also known as the Kadosh Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He. So this Sefirah represents the masculine side of God. The goal of Kabbalah is to unite the male and the female, to bring these two halves of God together, Tiferet, the male, and Malchut, or Shekhinah, the female. Their union is seen as the goal of Torah, the goal of mitzvot. This sounds very strange in a Jewish context to speak about a male and female half of God and the union of God, the romance of God. This is a mystical depiction, and I think it's meant to tell us something about our role in religion, because according to Kabbalah, the divine couple cannot unite, Tiferet cannot unite with Shekhinah unless we act in the world. If we act virtuously, if we act righteously, if we perform the mitzvot, if we bring about tikkun olam, if we repair the world, if we mend the world, then we stimulate the love between Tiferet and Malchut. Then we unify the divine couple. We unite God. We make God one. God is one, but God yearns for us to be involved in the divine process, in the divine manifestation. So the passage we're going to look at today speaks about Shekhinah, right? Her technical Kabbalistic name is Malchut, but I'm going to refer to her more as Shekhinah. So Shekhinah and Tiferet will be mentioned today. And at the end, there'll be a very brief allusion to Bina. Bina meaning understanding. Bina is pictured as the divine mother. Bina gives birth to the lower 7 Sefirot. The Divine Father, near the top, is Chokhmah. Even though the word Chokhmah is feminine, in Kabbalah, Chokhmah is the father, Bina is the mother, and they generate the 7 lower Sefirot. But as I say, the focus today is going to be on Shekhinah, or Malchut, Tiferet, and Bina, at the end, very briefly, their mother, the Divine Mother. One other thing about Shekhinah, the tree of life, we've come across that image. Some of you have seen other pictures of Kabbalistic trees. The Sefirot are often pictured as a tree. But Kabbalah actually speaks of 2 different trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. The tree of life is identified with Tiferet, sometimes with all of the Sefirot, but sometimes specifically with Tiferet. So this middle Sefirah can be called Eitz HaChayim, the tree of life. Shekhinah is known as Eitz HaDa'at, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. According to Genesis, Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which can imply many things. Because of the fact that they eat of that tree, they become mortal. So death comes into the world as a result of eating from the tree of knowledge. And because of that, partly because of that, Shekhinah is associated both with life and with death. We'll see a passage today connecting Shekhinah with death, but she is the source of life and also has a connection to the end of life and to death itself. Okay, let's begin our passage. This is from the Zohar Pritzker edition. This is the Zohar on the Torah portion of Bereshit, the first Torah portion of the Torah. And actually, there is the quote here from the first portion in the passage we're looking at. Near the top of the page, you do have Genesis 1:1 here at Hashamayim. But we're going to begin over here with Rabbi Shimon teaching us something about fire and light and meditating on a candle. If you have the Zohar Pritzker edition, volume 1, it's on page 282. But we'll send out this PDF. Ari has already made it available, and anyone who wants it can get it easily from Ari. So let's begin. They rose and were about to leave. In other words, a few of the rabbis are discussing Torah, discussing the secrets, when Rabbi Shimon said, "A word lingers here with us." It's a beautiful way to say, I have something more to say. There's one more thing I'd like to teach. Rabbi Shimon says, "A word lingers here with us." He opened saying, 2 verses are written. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God is a devouring fire, and you, cleaving to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, are alive, every one of you today. Okay, 2 verses from the book of Deuteronomy. Even though this is the Zohar on Genesis, the Zohar loves to jump around and quote verses from other books. So he's quoting here 2 verses from the last book of the Torah, Sefer Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. And what's the problem with these 2 verses? There seems to be a problem, which is the first verse says, God is a devouring fire. Ki Adonai Elohecha esh ochlahu. And then in the same chapter of Deuteronomy, you, cleaving to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, are alive, every one of you today. The Hebrew is V'atem ha'devekim b'Adonai Elohechem chayim kulchem hayom. I'm sure many of you recognize that because it's part of the service. It's part of the Shabbat morning service when the Torah is about to be read, when the Torah is taken out from the ark. This verse is recited. This verse is chanted by the cantor or the rabbi. V'atem ha'devekim b'Adonai Elohechem chayim kulchem hayom. You, cleaving to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, are alive, every one of you today. So what's the problem? The problem is God is a fire. How can you possibly cleave to God? So the verses seem to present that problem. And that problem is discussed in rabbinic literature, and the Zohar has its own approach. So continue here. We have established these verses in various places, and the companions have been aroused by them. means the companions are the companions of Rabbi Shimon, other rabbis. But what he means here is that these verses have already been discussed in the Talmud, in the Midrash, not just in the Zohar, but in earlier texts of Jewish tradition. The question is, how can these two verses make sense together? How can God be a father?
I feel like this is a perfect opportunity to send you an actual voice note. Yeah, you should get up right now, take the deepest breath of the day, and go into those beautiful waters, have yourself a nice scrub down, then a nice bottle of water, and take a nap.
Fire, and yet how can we be commanded to cling to that fire, to join that fire? Let's look down at a note to see how these verses are discussed in earlier texts. This is page 282, note 1341. Quite a lot of footnotes pile up here in this volume. We have established these verses. The apparent contradiction between the two verses is discussed in the Talmud. BT is Babylonian Talmud, the tractate Kitover about marriage documents. Rabbi Elazar said, "You cleaving to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, are alive, every one of you today. Now, is it possible to cleave to Shekhinah? How can you cleave to God?" Notice he says Shekhinah. Shekhinah in the Talmud doesn't mean the feminine half of God. In the Talmud, Shekhinah means God, or the divine presence. How can you cleave to God when it is written, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God is a devouring fire? Okay, that's the question the Talmud poses. How can you cleave to God if God is Esh Ochla, a devouring fire? Rather, the meaning is, whoever marries his daughter to a disciple of the wise, meaning to a scholar, if you marry your daughter to a Torah scholar, or if you conduct business on the behalf of scholars, if you benefit scholars from your assets, then you are regarded by Scripture as if you cleave to Shekhinah. Very interesting. So he's really saying it's impossible to cleave to fire. You can't cleave to God. You would be burned up instantly. But if you support scholars, then it's as if you joined Shekhinah. Okay, notice a parallel in Babylonian Talmud Sotan, another part of the Talmud. Here I'm paraphrasing. Rabbi Chama, son of Hanina, explains that one can approach and withstand the consuming fire of Shekhinah by imitating the divine. If you imitate God, then it's as if you cling to Shekhinah. How do you imitate God? By clothing the naked, visiting the sick, comforting mourners, burying the dead. In other words, if you act virtuously, if you act ethically, if you act with some care and compassion and love for other people, then it's as if you are clinging to Shekhinah. There's one beautiful mystical response to this, the end of this note. A mystical response to this dilemma is offered by Chikatilo. It's a Kabbalist who lived in Spain around the time of the Zohar. He says, as for what the rabbis have said, now is it possible for one to cleave to Shekhinah? It certainly is. He takes that question, which is a rhetorical question, right? In the Talmud, it's, can you really cleave to Shekhinah? Obviously you can't. But Chikatilo says, no, you can. Being a mystic, being a Kabbalist, he thinks it is possible to cling, to cleave, to join the divine. So all of that is in the Talmud, and that's how Rabbi Shimon says we have established these verses. Okay, we've already talked about it, but he says, come and see. He's now going to offer a new approach to this image of God being a fire. Come and see. For Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God is a devouring fire. The word has been discussed among the companions. There is a fire, devouring and consuming it. For there is fire fiercer than fire, as they have established. Okay, there are different types of fire. Don't think that there's just one fire. Look down at the note and you'll see what he's referring to here in the Talmud, note 1342. This is page 282, the right-hand column. See, again, BT, Babylonian Talmud. Here it's the tractate Yoma, the tractate devoted to Yom Kippur. And in that Talmudic passage, we read that the fire of Shekhinah is called a fire-devouring fire. The angels are fiery, and Shekhinah is so strong it can devour the fire of the angels. So that's what Rabbi Shimon says. There is a fire-devouring fire. So he's alluding here to Shekhinah. Okay, in the Talmud, Shekhinah is called a fire-devouring fire. And you remember I said previously the Zohar avoids giving the names of the Sefirot, just to make it a little more interesting, a little more difficult, more challenging for the reader. So Rabbi Shimon could just say, we're talking about Shekhinah, but he doesn't name Shekhinah, he just says a fire-devouring fire. And that's supposed to remind us that in the Talmud, Shekhinah is called exactly that. But come and see. Notice he starts the paragraph, come and see, and now just a few lines later, but come and see. Let's look more deeply into this. Whoever desires to penetrate the wisdom of holy unification. What does that mean? Whoever wants to penetrate the wisdom of holy unification. If you want to understand how the Sefirot unite, okay, what he really means here is if you want to understand how Tiferet, the male, unites with Shekhinah, the female, or maybe he means how all of the Sefirot unite together. If you want to understand the union of the Sefirot, you should contemplate the flame ascending from a glowing ember or a burning candle. For flame ascends only when grasped by coarse substance. Okay, that last line means simply a flame can't burn unless it has fuel. The candle can't burn unless without the wax. A lamp can't burn without oil, with some fuel. So watching the flame from a candle, from an ember, will help you understand how the Sefirot unite. And now he's going to explain. Come and see. Okay, a third, come and see. The Aramaic ta chazeh, come and see. In a flame ascending are two lights, a white light radiant, the other a light tinged with black or blue. Okay, you can picture in your mind a candle. Some of you may have a candle burning. And I encourage you to try a candle meditation after we complete this at some point. When you have time, take out this passage again and do it actually looking at the candle. But you can see that. We all have that picture of the flame, and then at the bottom of the flame, it's darker. The more the middle of the flame is blue, and toward the bottom it can turn darker. So Rabbi Shimon wants us to think about two lights, the white light and let's say for the moment the blue light. The white light is above, ascending unswervingly, while beneath it is the blue or black light, a throne for the white, which rests upon it, each embracing the other, becoming one. Okay, now, he's going to say this in a moment, but I'll just say it right now. The white light here symbolizes Tiferet. The blue light symbolizes Shekhinah. Let's look again here. He's calling Tiferet the white light. Okay, Tiferet here is the white light, and Malchut, Shekhinah, is the blue or black light. And their union is what he's talking about. Okay, each embracing the other. Okay, the union of those two sefirot happens as we see in the candle. Those two colors are united or are joined. This black light colored blue below is a throne of glory for the white. Here lies the mystery of the thread of